Hello, everybody. I hope you all are enjoying your dinner. We are going to continue with our awards ceremony, and we have a very exciting keynote guest speaker today. Some of you may have seen her showing off her singing prowess last night, which was very impressive. Yes, round of applause for Melissa Rowley. Melissa is also a serial media and tech entrepreneur and climate justice and gender equity advocate, building ecosystems and campaigns to reimagine the climate narrative and drive decarbonization. She's currently the founder and CEO of mission-driven consulting firm and production house Warrior Love Productions, and a go-to expert for the United Nations Climate Change Global Innovation Hub. Last year, she led communications and business development for the World Bank's Low Carbon City program, which helps cities in the Global South optimize international carbon markets. Melissa, please give her a welcome, everybody.
How's everybody feeling? Oh, come on. I saw several of you belting your heads off with a live rock and roll karaoke band last night. How are you all feeling? Come on. Some of you are liquored up. All right. So, before we get started, I have a very, very serious question for all of you. Have any of you seen the movie Mean Girls that came out in 2004? It was written by Tina Fey, starring Lindsay Lohan. Some of you are totally lying. I know more of you have seen it than that. Have any of you been to COP? Were any of you at COP 28 last year in Dubai? Okay. Or did you at least hear about it from your colleagues? Okay, if you didn't go there. So I promise I will make a connection between Mean Girls and COP 28. Last year when I was in Dubai for COP 28, Expo City in Dubai, if any of you have ever been, then you'll know that it's very vast and overwhelming. And the first day, I didn't have any speaking engagements in the blue zone. So I was hanging out in the green zone, totally lost, walking around, sweating profusely, dehydrated, cranky. I just wanted ice cream. Couldn't find any ice cream, guys. I was told there was ice cream. And I have no internal navigation skills. I have traveled to about 70 countries, and I have no idea how I survived. So this situation was not ideal for me. I ran into a guy who worked there, and he said, "Oh, here's a map." I said, "Great." And he said, "But it only works if you turn it upside down because we're upside down in the map." And I'm like, this isn't going well. But eventually, I found this really beautiful, large, fake patch of grass surrounded by a white picket fence with lounge chairs and people standing around. So I went into that and I sat down, and as I was taking in the scene, looking at all the different groups of people, all the different subgroups and cliques, I thought, this is like Mean Girls. But not because anybody was being mean, just because of the subcultures going on under the umbrella of COP. You had the solar bros in one corner, the climate tech bros across the street. Women work in both fields, too. I know, I just like saying bros. You had the corporate carbon markets crew trying to figure out how they're all going to meet net zero by 2050. Woohoo! You've got the supply chain innovators, the zero plastic waste crusaders, the intersectional environmentalists, scientists, the sexy young Gen Z activists, and you know the ones that are all on Time 100, all on Time 100 Next. And then you had the wisdom keepers. So you get the drift. There was a lot of diversity in terms of the groups that I was taking on, and I thought, you know, there's so many stories here. There must be so many fascinating stories of how all these people got here and why they're all working in climate. And additionally to that, you know, why they're doing this. You know, I think similar to that scene in Mean Girls, right? Which I actually have to go back to the whole Mean Girls point. The point of Mean Girls is that in the cafeteria scene, when Lindsay Lohan is being told kind of the lay of the land, all the different groups, she's looking around and she's her new friend is pointing out, you've got the varsity jocks over there, the JV jocks over there, you've got the nerdy Asians, you've got the really cool Asians, you've got the mean black hotties. I never really got that one. You've got the burnouts, the wannabes, and then you have the mean girls, or the plastics, as they were called. So going back to COP, again, nobody was mean, but we were all operating in these groups, and I thought, we're all here for the same thing. In the same way that all of us are here at the Climate Leadership Conference to talk about climate and figure out how we can build solutions together. Same thing going on in COP. There were company evolutions, all these new solutions, people wanting to start a revolution. The issue that I see a lot in the climate movement, whether it's in carbon markets or ESG, resilience and adaptation, anything having to do with climate justice, is we're so siloed. We're so siloed, and that's to be expected. The problem with being siloed is that we have different approaches. And as I'm sure you're all aware, when we have different approaches, judgments abound, right? And I'm not here to lecture anybody about being judgmental. We're humans, so that's what we do. But when there's judgment, there's no room for nuance. And solutions, people, climate is so nuanced. But there's so much generalizing and stereotyping and shoulding in global issues and in the climate movement. I'm sure some of you have heard these phrases. I'm going to read some off. So, investments shouldn't go into carbon avoidance. They should only go into carbon removal. You shouldn't buy into the voluntary carbon market. It's a scam. I know we've all heard that. Carbon capture and storage is a scam. We hear that a lot from people that don't know anything about the technologies going to that. All corporations are guilty of greenwashing. ESG perpetuates greenwashing. ESG is woke capital. Quantifying scope 3 emissions is too hard. No one understands tax credits. What are we doing? And again, my concern with these stories, this language that's perpetuating stories, is that there's no nuance. And when we lose the art of nuance, walls go up and conversations break down. And as I'm sure some of you have also seen, we're living in a very, very divided time. I don't want to get into the politics of all that. This is the time or place. But we've got the largest election year in history coming up in just a few months. And more than 60 countries are voting on legislation in local governments and in national governments. And I'm worried. But when I think about how diverse the climate movement is, even though we're so siloed, I thought, what if the climate movement, what if all of us working in our siloed respective industries, what if we could come together and collectively tell a story of unification and solidarity? And what if we actually, these are my slides that I totally forgot to do. We'll go back to that one. I'm sure you'll have thoughts on that one. If we have time, we'll go back to that one. So here we go. What if the climate community across sectors and continents could get so aligned on our story that we set an example for the rest of the world? And this goes into culture, right? Because culture is all about what we consider achievements. What do we consider our greatest accomplishments? What language are we using? What kind of media are we consuming? What kind of media and stories are we putting out into the world? The panel this morning, I thought, was really inspirational. Lisa Jacobson, are you here somewhere? Is she here? So Lisa pointed out during this morning's panel that there are going to be some technologies that emerge in the future that are going to do unprecedented things that we could even imagine, right? That got me thinking of the solar punk movement, which I was talking about the other day. So for those of you who don't know, solar punk is a subgenre of speculative fiction and a collectivist social movement that envisions the progressions of technology alongside the environment. That is a mouthful. But so basically it's just like Wakanda, but through an environmental sustainability lens, right? So Scott too mentioned how climate is leading to new business models, right, on that panel. Huge stories there. Anytime we see new business models, that means new stories. Ethan Zindler talked about how climate is the biggest economic opportunity in the 21st century. As a former journalist, I think that headline should be across every mainstream publication on a regular basis. And Chris Ronayne talked about how his son was saying, Dad, what are we going to do about climate change? That is a really beautiful, special, intergenerational climate story. A lot of young climate activists are talking about intergenerational communication stories, so keep your eye on that one. And then Rick Saines was brought up, and I mean, I don't know if playing the drums is really a climate story, but since you've been playing drums so beautifully for so long and you're a leader in climate, some drummer out there, some kid who wants to be a drummer could look at you and say, I don't know anything about climate, but that guy's doing that, and so now I want to work in climate, you know? So I'm pointing this out because we all have these nuances inside of us and all these stories, and one of the problems that we're facing as a species is that climate affects every aspect of our lifestyles and our lives, the air we breathe, the content we consume, our transportation, the clothes we wear. But there's a great opportunity in that because since climate affects every aspect of our lives, the storytelling opportunities are absolutely endless. And it just so happens that there are a number of organizations, primarily in Los Angeles, but also outside of Hollywood, that are working to change this, that are working, actually not to change this, but to perpetuate it and bring it forward. So there's an organization that I'm close to called Good Energy, and what they do is they work with teleplay writers and screenplay writers and big movie studios to help them incorporate compelling, scientifically proven, but sexy climate storytelling. And they have something called their climate reality check, which they incorporate when they're looking at some of the top grossing films and figuring out whether or not they touch on climate in either a direct or indirect way. And these films do not need to be climate themed. As we know, a lot of climate themed movies are apocalyptic, but not in this dojo. So there was a movie, tiny little movie that came out last summer called Barbie. You might have heard of it. So there was a section, all right, not as many as for Mean Girls, but basically there's a scene in there where America, the girl who plays America Ferrera's daughter, is talking to Barbie. Barbie's going in search of her, and she basically says this quote right here, that you destroyed girls' innate sense of worth and you're killing the planet with your glorification of rampant consumerism. So not a direct climate hit, but consumerism is directly related to climate. Also, Mission Impossible, Dead Reckoning, right? So is there this scene where Tom Cruise is talking to a government or spy operative, and he's basically saying, what are you even doing, man? Like, what's the point? The next world war is going to be a cold one. It's going to be a ballistic war over a rapidly shrinking ecosystem. It's going to be a war for the last of our dwindling energy, drinkable water, and breathable air. Your days of fighting for the greater good are over. And then my favorite, this was not part of Good Energy's climate reality check, but do we have any Ted Lasso fans? All right. I knew I liked you guys. So Ted Lasso, I binged on that series really hard, all 3 seasons. In the second season, some of you may remember this episode. There's an episode where Sam, beloved character from Nigeria, is really excited to share with his father that he's a spokesperson for the team sponsor, for the soccer team sponsor, and the sponsor is Dubai Air, fictional company. And his dad said, I'm so disappointed in you. The parent company of Dubai Air is an oil company that is destroying Nigeria. As soon as Sam hears this news, he boycotts and he says, basically, I can't go out on the field and play. And he covers his jersey with duct tape, not sure what his teammates are going to think, but rather than abandon him, his teammates follow suit and they put on the same thing. They cover their jersey with duct tape and they go out in the field together. And so this is not a corporate climate story winning, but this is a climate action activist story winning. And it just shows solidarity. It shows what happens when people express themselves and show their complexities and their nuance. So I'm bringing this back to the art of nuance. There's also some more going on in comedy and climate. Have any of you heard of this? It's kind of a fairly new thing. I haven't been to any of these shows, but there's a group called the Climate Comedy Cohort, which is bringing together comedians to collaborate and talk about the hottest scientifically proven climate news. I'm very interested in seeing how they do. And of course, I can't talk about culture unless I talk about Queen Bee. So Cowboy Carter, I haven't listened to the whole album, to be honest. Have any of you? All right, so the song Yeah Yeah, there's a lyric where Beyonce sings, wildfire burnt his house down, insurance ain't gonna pay no Fannie Mae. So it's not a positive climate solution or story by any means, but basically she's bringing this back to everyday life, bringing this back to relatability, bringing this back to the nuance of our livelihoods and the housing crisis and everything affected by climate like wildfires. And the insurance industry is definitely taking a pretty hard hit from what I understand due to some of these disasters. So eventually, I'm going to bring this back to COP. Eventually, my last day of COP28, I was back in the green zone. Again, I had no speaking engagements, and this time I had some lay of the land, so I knew where I was going. I was sitting in the energy pavilion, charging my phone, and a woman approached me, and she said, can I please sit down and charge my phone? I just passed out outside. And I said, why, what happened? She said, I just so dehydrated. And I was like, maybe there's an ice cream guy out there, but she sat down next to me, and I asked her what she did for a living, and she said that she was an oceanographer for a fossil fuel company. I said, that's fascinating. Tell me more. And so she started to explain to me that she began working with this fossil fuel company to help them make the energy transition. That is a story that needs to be told, because talk about nuance and talk about complexity and talk about judgment that she probably faces every day, especially at an event like COP28, where all the headlines were basically all about the record number of fossil fuel delegates, and people were appalled by this. I don't know why so many people were appalled that so many fossil fuel companies were being represented in Dubai, but a lot of people were appalled by this. And my question when everybody was in an uproar was, but maybe some of these people were doing what she's doing. And even executives who weren't doing what she's doing, they have a story to do. They have a story to tell. They're here to try to collectively make this work. My biggest takeaway at COP28 for the full 2 weeks that I was there was that against all of the panels and sessions I sat on, talking about carbon markets and cities, the decarbonization of cities, talking about climate storytelling. I did a lot of panels on that topic. Climate finance. We need all of it. We need regulation. We need policy, or else we're not going to go anywhere. We need the regulation to incentivize companies to do better and to stay on top of things like many of your organizations are doing. We need finance. I think we need a lot more attention in climate adaptation and resilience. That's my personal take on it. We need climate justice. We should have justice in all of our storytelling. We should, every business in here should be talking about justice, maybe even use the word. But when we're doing all this and putting so much funding and we're sitting on our panels and then posting pictures of ourselves on LinkedIn, I just did that today. But, in my opinion, none of this matters if our culture doesn't fundamentally shift. And again, this goes back to the stories we tell. How are we telling them? Are we telling them with nuance? Are we telling them with grace? Are we being inclusive? And are we doing it in a way that we're not hitting people over the head with fear-mongering and scientific stats in language that nobody understands except us and the United Nations and scientists? Some businesses tell me when I talk to them about culture, they say, well, I'm not Ryan Gosling, I'm not Margot Robbie, I'm not Hollywood, so I don't have an influence on culture. But businesses have so much influence on culture. After government, you are the next level of power. So you have so much influence, and there are so many different ways to tell your stories. Not just about your mission and what you're doing and the great work that you're doing to cut emissions and make the world a better place, but your own personal stories, your own layers of complexity, your own career trajectory and how you got here to this time to talk about climate, which could be the biggest economic opportunity in the 21st century and is the most pressing issue of our time. So I'm going to talk a little bit about myself, just so that you can understand why Amy asked me to do this and why you should trust me. I have been a journalist on and off throughout my life. I started my career at CNN and Associated Press. The picture in the left corner is me flying in zero gravity. I thought I was going to be graceful, but when you're in zero gravity, you really are in zero gravity. There's nothing keeping you down. I'm a big adventurer. I've lived all over the world. I'm still a columnist. I write for Reuters and Rolling Stone occasionally. My bread and butter is doing climate communications and strategy, content strategy, business development, and really helping get a positive climate story out there that's one of solidarity and one that can help unify us and be an example to the rest of the world. So, my final message to you is, would everybody say this out loud with me? 1, 2, 3. Get in, loser. We're going to decarbonize the world. Okay, here's my contact info. If I don't get to meet any of you tonight, I'm here until tomorrow morning. I'd love to speak to you online or offline. Thank you for being so nice and welcoming. I grew up in Michigan. It's been so beautiful to be here in the Midwest. I used to go to Cleveland every year because my mom grew up here. And being someone who goes to a lot of international events like COP and Davos and all those things, I don't get to hear as much about what's going on in Middle America. So it's been a real privilege to be here. Thank you so much.